мемлекеттік деңгейде.
I have reached a status where I can finally express my opinions at the state level. Before, I would speak at conferences or discuss ideas among fellow scholars and legal professionals. But here I speak from a position of authority. You could say I have developed my political muscle.
Жинадым десем болады. Мен заңды
I could read the law and I could interpret it, but I hadn't yet learned to write it. But as a legal professional, I've always been drawn to the legislative process.
шығарушылықпен айналысу. Көбіне бірінші
The first thing most people ask me is, what is your last name? Shapak is actually my father's first name. Since I was born in Mongolia, we don't use surnames there. We are simply identified by our father's name. I was inseparable from my father. Whenever he would stand up to leave, I was right there, following him like a shadow. That's the kind of girl I was. But with my mother, there was always a certain distance between us. She lived with her grandmother until she was 3. After that, she came back to me. Even as a young child, she stood out. She was very bright, alert, and clearly gifted. Since she was our only child, we truly doted on her. She was very pampered. Her father especially, absolutely adored her. Growing up, I was surrounded by so much love and warmth. Perhaps that's why, to this day, I still have this sense of freedom and a playful, spirited side to my personality. The people around me definitely notice it.
Шапақ ағайды көрген емеспіз. Бірақ
We never actually met Unzila's father, Mr. Shapak, but after hearing so many stories about him, I feel as though I knew him personally. Somehow I can sense his character, his gestures, the way he spoke, and even the way he walked. It's clear that for Unzila, her father was a towering figure. He was her mentor, teaching her so much from such a young age.
үйреткені көп болған.
Back in school, I think I was what you'd call hyperactive. 4 hours of classes just weren't enough for me. I needed something more. So I was always among the most active students. I've been the class leader since the first grade, but even that wasn't enough. So I threw myself into every school activity. I just couldn't sit still at home. I tell my father I want to work. One day I was walking along and saw a sign in a small building, Assistant Tailor Wanted. I knocked softly, and when the door opened, I realized it was a military sewing workshop, a place where they made uniforms. I went in and they asked, "Do you know how to sew on buttons?" "We're looking for someone to help with this military greatcoats." I told them, yes, I do. They asked my age. I was about 13 or 14. I started with the buttons and had finished them so quickly they taught me how to sew them by hand and how to tie the knots properly. I caught on fast. I noticed 2 or 3 women working in the back, sewing military bed sheets and duvet covers. They asked me, "Do you know how to use a sewing machine?" I said, "I do." They said, "Let's see," and had me stitch a few straight lines. They decided to train me so I could help them in my spare time. Back then it was a planned economy. Those women were focused on one thing, working as fast as possible to meet their production quotas. I earned a very good wage at my first job. In fact, my pay ended up being higher than that of even the most skilled tailors working there. The truth is, my parents didn't actually need my money. So my father asked me, "What are you going to spend your earnings on?" When I said I didn't know, he gave me a suggestion. I have a younger brother, and a children's bicycle called Baldirgan had just arrived at the store. I went there, paid for it with my own money, and we brought that bike home for my only brother. That was the wonderful thing about my parents. They showed me how to use my earnings the right way. They taught me the value of giving.
Маған көрсете алды.
The migration movement began in 1991.
жылы басталды.
I was graduating from school at that exact time. The decision to move was ultimately my father's. We are a traditional patriarchal family, so my father is the one who makes the final decisions.
Сол папасы
Ever since he was young, her father dreamed of returning to his ancestral homeland. He wanted his children to grow up there, to be raised in their own country, and to build their professional careers there.
қорқыныш маған.
I was filled with so much fear and anxiety. I worried constantly because the children only spoke Mongolian.
Өтіп кетті. Мен қазақ
I arrived in Kazakhstan with all my documents and the country welcomed me. The language was a challenge, but I have a sharp mind and I tried my best to pick it up. Whether through gestures or sheer intuition, I managed to understand enough to get by. Eventually, we bought our plane tickets to Karaganda.
She moved from Mongolia to Kazakhstan in 1991. Now, we usually categorize Kazakhs returning from Mongolia into two groups. There are those from regions like Bayan-Olgi, which are predominantly Kazakh, but Unzila came from the capital of Mongolia. She was the only Kazakh in her school, surrounded by Mongolians, and she was educated entirely in the Mongolian language. In 1991, she arrived in Karaganda, and we all remember what the city was like back then. At the time, she could speak conversational Kazakh, but she hadn't yet mastered the literary or academic level required for university studies.
The moment I stepped into the classroom, it hit me. I realized I didn't understand a thing. I didn't know the language well enough. I only had what you call survival Kazakh, just enough to get by at home. But once I entered a purely Kazakh-speaking environment, I found myself completely lost. I couldn't understand anyone. All I had with me was a Mongolian-Russian dictionary I'd brought from Mongolia.
Studying two languages simultaneously, she graduated from Karaganda University with honors. Later, she went on to successfully defend her candidate's dissertation, followed by her doctoral thesis. What truly sets her apart is her relentless drive, that fierce, unwavering willpower I mentioned earlier. Once she sets a goal, she doesn't stop until she achieves it.
Then I started reading the epic novel The Path of Abai. Even during class breaks, I wouldn't look up. I was completely immersed in it. By the time I finished that book, I was speaking Kazakh. Everyone around me was absolutely stunned. I mastered the literary language, and since I was studying so intensely, I also adapted to normative language, the precise language of the law. I became so proficient that I eventually reached a point where I could translate lectures into Kazakh for some of my professors.
She is a woman of science through and through. You know what the situation was like in Kazakhstan in the early 90s. You know the state of the economy back then. Science was one of the most undervalued sectors at the time. Yet she forged her career in that incredibly difficult environment.
Our primary goal was to reach the summit of science, and I achieved it. I dedicated myself entirely to my research, and after 3 years of working alongside renowned academics and top-tier legal minds, I successfully defended my candidate's dissertation. My clear objective back then was to become a candidate of sciences. I wanted to fully immerse myself in academia, to become a university lecturer, then an associate professor, and eventually a full professor. That was my roadmap.
Жалпы адам үлкен өмірге аяқ басқанда бірінші шәкірттерінің алдына аудиторияға келгенде
When you first step into the professional world and walk into a classroom to face your students, you naturally want to project authority. You want to show your knowledge and come across as a profound intellectual figure. I entered that classroom with the same mindset, maintaining a professional distance, being a bit aloof and strictly grading their work. I was that kind of teacher at first, but after 6 months, I realized that you can't truly teach people that way. I decided it was better to be a mentor who stands by their side. Since then, I've always worked very closely with my students.
Оқытушы болайын деп, кейін студенттермен мен өте жақын жұмыс жасаймын. Енді о кісіні
She earned the reputation of being a fair and just dean. Of course, she isn't the type to simply overlook mistakes or tell you that you're always right. She listens to every side of an issue, but ultimately, her decisions are always made with the students' best interests at heart.
шешім жасайды.
I can't claim to have done it all on my own. I had a husband who truly understood me, and my mother was a massive help. She handled all the household matters so I could focus on my work. She made everything run so smoothly for me. She would study day and night. My husband left me with one final request. No matter what, ensure our daughter gets her education. He asked me to guide her and support her as far as she could go. I felt I had to fulfill his word, the sacred trust he placed in me. So when she returns from somewhere, I always want to have something ready for her. I worry, is she hungry? Is she thirsty? Is she upset or just exhausted? I make sure I'm there, preparing everything for her myself.
Қасымдағы адамдарым жақсы болды, достарым жақсы болды.
I've been blessed with wonderful people around me, great friends and a supportive environment, but life has also had its cruel moments. I lost my father, the man I had always leaned on. Then my younger brother passed away. Our family went through some incredibly dark and difficult times during that period.
Ауыр жағдайлар болып жатты. Unzilaға қарағанда бір нәзік.
When you look at Unzila, she seems so delicate, at times almost like a young girl. She has a gentle way of speaking and a soft gaze. But behind that gentleness lies a remarkably strong character. She had to be strong, especially after losing her husband at such a young age.
Жолдасым қайтыс болып кеткеннен кейін,
After my husband passed away, my father-in-law had already retired. My mother and mother-in-law were still working, but the loss was incredibly hard on them. My mother-in-law took it especially hard. However, during that first year, the support I received was vital. My mother-in-law took charge of the children's early education, teaching them herself. Meanwhile, my own mother made sure they got to all their after-school activities. They helped me with everything. I don't really believe in fairy tales where one woman is so strong that she overcomes everything entirely on her own. To truly get through it, you need your loved ones by your side. Throughout my career, I've held various leadership roles, serving as both a dean and a vice rector. Alongside those positions, I also worked as an expert at a scientific research institute. I've always balanced multiple roles. I never limited myself to just one job. There were times when I was managing 3 or 4 different responsibilities at once.
Her achievements go far beyond defending a doctoral thesis or becoming a member of the Mazhilis. In between, she served as a member of the Constitutional Council and represented our country on the Venice Commission, where the world's finest legal minds assemble. Many might not be familiar with the Venice Commission, so let me explain. Kazakhstan appoints only 2 lawyers to serve a 4-year term, and they are personally confirmed by a presidential decree. It is an incredibly prestigious body where the top legal elite from around the globe gather. Having served on the Venice Commission is, quite frankly, the pinnacle of a legal career.
Ең жоғарғы деңгей деп айтсақ болады. Біз енді 2023 жыл депутат болып сайланғаннан кейін
Since being elected to the Mazhilis in 2023, we have served together on the Committee on Legislation and Judicial Legal Reform. There are 7 committees in total, but this is where her unique signature is most visible. Like a true scholar, she possesses a relentless, meticulous eye for detail. I mean this in the best possible way. Often when a document comes in, we might skim through it and miss certain nuances. But she will dig deeper, cross-examining every point until she brings the truth to the surface.
Қайта қазбалап отырып, соны судың бетіне шығармай қоймайды бұл кісі.
Әкелігін анықтау деп айтады.
Take the legal term for establishing paternity. I remember a lawyer once told me he was working on a case of әкесін таныту. I was shocked. I asked, what exactly do you mean by that? You see, in colloquial Kazakh, әкесін таныту is actually an idiom for beating someone up. It has nothing to do with the law, yet he insisted on using it to mean paternity. It was so awkward. We had to standardize the term to әкелігін таныту, the proper legal recognition of paternity. That was the state of our legal language back then. Therefore, our first priority must be comprehensive review of the terminology used in the original texts of all legal and normative acts in the Kazakh language to ensure consistency. Upon taking office, my very first parliamentary inquiry addressed the need to standardize legal language in Kazakh and bring it to a unified level of precision. I firmly believe that our laws should be originally drafted in Kazakh. During my 3 years in parliament, we have successfully drafted 3 major laws in the Kazakh language from the ground up.
3 заңға қатысты қалай жұмыс жасағанымызды айтайын. Жұмыстан тыс уақытта жұмыс.
Let me tell you how we worked on those 3 laws. We worked outside of regular hours, Saturdays, Sundays, and public holidays. Often we'd stay late after 6 or 7 p.m. to keep going. It was essentially an extra workload for us, but it was something we did out of pure conviction. We felt that we had to leave a mark and initiate a real turning point. We couldn't just let things continue as they were. It was entirely our own initiative. And all this was on top of our regular committee meetings, plenary sessions, and daily working groups.
Жалпы мен соңғы 7 жыл конституциялық кеңесте отырған кезде менің апталық, айлық графигімді білетінмін.
During my 7 years on the Constitutional Council, I always knew my weekly or monthly schedule in advance. But in parliamentary work, your schedule is set on Friday for the following week, and by Monday it might completely change. You aren't just focused on legislation. We are representatives of the people, so there are countless issues from every sector demanding our attention. Then there are the meetings with citizens and site visits. I became a parliament member during a turbulent and transformative time. Since 2019, we've seen major reforms, and by 2023, we entered a new phase of constitutional reform. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that a fresh breeze of change has been blowing through our society.
Бізде қоғамдағы мәселе, қоғамдағы жағдай өте бір жаңа леппен жел соққан кезең деп айтсам артық болмайтын шығар. Мен билікте әйел адамдардың болғанын дұрыс деп санаймын. Бірақ әйел адамдардың көретін заттарын кейбір ер азаматтар көрмейді.
I firmly believe that women belong in positions of power. There are certain things we see that men often overlook. We are observant and we pay close attention to the finer details. In decision-making, there's a principle called checks and balances, and women are exceptionally good at maintaining that harmony. Men can be rigid at times. Once they take charge, they tend to charge ahead without looking back. You see that in many strong, bold men. But we can provide the necessary restraint. Women have that ability. Even when we are drafting laws and the men are locked in a heated debate, refusing to budge, we, the women, will step back, consult among ourselves, and then return to explain things to them. That's how we resolve so many issues. We know how to find common ground, and we know how to unite our strength.
Өзіміз қайтадан ақылдасып алып, қайтадан ер адамдарға барып түсіндіріп, сөйтіп қанша нәрсені ретіне келтіріп жатамыз. Біз әйел адамдарда бір-бірімізбен тіл табыса аламыз. Біз күшімізді біріктіре аламыз.